And have in mind your interview, the time that you spent with her directly reviewing all of the documents, all of the medical records, everything that we've talked about. And you're also aware from her, not specifically what she said to you, but you're aware of the circumstances from her recollection as to the killings that she told you. Is that correct?
Yes, as well as the journal she kept and other evidence of her thinking and symptoms as the time approached for the crime on January 24th, 2023.
Okay, and you were also aware of her access to her cell phone, doing Google searches and looking up medications during that period of October, November, December, and January. You're aware of that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and can you tell the jurors, in your opinion, sir, with your years of experience in the issue of filicide, working for just the government on a number of cases and the defense, and your evaluation of Lindsay, can you tell this jury your opinion as to whether or not at the time of the killings that she was suffering from a disease or defect that impaired her ability to substantially appreciate and or conform her conduct to the requirements of the law?
Well, sure. Let me begin with the issue of whether she had a mental disease or a defect. Ms. Clancy had a severe depression. There is a book called the DSM, or Diagnostic Manual, prepared by the American Psychiatric Association, which lists criteria for various diseases. So in the diagnostic manual, for example, one needs to have 5 out of 9 symptoms to make a diagnosis of major depression. And Ms. Clancy, as she approached the date of the crime, actually had 7 of the 9 symptoms and was severely depressed. So that in addition to that, she had some earlier evidence of what's called a mild mania, and that fits together in what's called bipolar 2. So in other words, it's a type of bipolar illness where there is more frank depression, severe depression, but the manic aspects are not as severe. So my final diagnosis of her was called bipolar 2 with a severe depression on January 24, 2023. And from reading the reports of all the experts that will be testifying, no one failed to diagnose a major mental disease on the day of the crime.
Now, doctor, in the course of that diagnosis, have you considered the concept of postpartum depression and or postpartum psychosis?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors how that...
First of all...
I'm sorry. Can you tell the jurors how that factors into your diagnosis and opinion?
Yes. Ms. Clancy had a history of anxiety and difficulty with each of her children. It was minor with her first child, more significant with her second child, and on the occasion of Callan's birth, things went well for the first 3 months, but then Ms. Clancy became very anxious and depressed, and it took quite a toll on her. And I believe the jury has heard from various treaters, such as Dr. Tufts and Nurse Delata and others, and her own anguish about how depressed she was, where she actually felt she couldn't function, her brain was damaged, she would never be the same. So she definitely met the definition of a major depression as well as this bipolar phenomenon. Now, with respect to the postpartum aspect, since Ms. Clancy's symptoms began within 3 months of Callan's birth, that would be considered a postpartum onset. Then, of course, she had considerable difficulty over the next 5 months, and at the time of the crime itself, on January 24, 2023, Ms. Clancy was frankly psychotic. So in that sense, she had a postpartum psychosis. It's actually not frequent to have a postpartum psychosis 8 months after a birth, but it does occasionally occur. And so what I can say is whether it is the classic postpartum psychosis or not, with the postpartum onset and frank psychosis on the day of the killing, I would label that a postpartum psychosis in the sense that it was a postpartum onset and she was clearly psychotic on that day.
And Doctor, when a person is psychotic or involved in having a psychosis, in your opinion, are they able to appear normal, quote unquote, communicate with people, drive a car, things of that nature?
Well, let me say there that Ms. Clancy herself did her best to not reveal the extent of her depression. She was frank with members of her own family. Her sister, her mother-in-law were aware of how anguished and depressed she was. But with more casual friends, she tended not to show the extent of her depression. I'm not suggesting that she was, although psychosis can indeed wax and wane. For example, on the day of her crime, I'm not suggesting that she was frankly psychotic every minute. She was functioning. In fact, she said she was having a better day than other days, and she actually went out and made a snowman with the kids, took Cora to a doctor for the 5th birthday checkup, and was functioning at a level that was not frankly psychotic until she had a command hallucination while her husband, Patrick, was out doing a couple of chores.
And can you tell us, Doctor, what, in your opinion, what a command hallucination is and how it fits, if you will, in a diagnosis of psychosis?
Yes. If we take, first of all, a hallucination is simply hearing a voice, and the voice can be benign or it can be more malignant. So a voice may just simply say, open the window. About 1/3 of voices are called command hallucinations. That is an instruction to do something. And the majority of those commands are benign. So it might be open a window, get a glass of water. It might be something much more ominous, such as to kill oneself or harm someone else. Those are dangerous command hallucinations. Now, in Ms. Clancy's case, she had not only a command hallucination on the day that she killed her children, she had what is known as a delusion of influence. That is, not only did she hear a command, but she felt that her body was taken over by an external force where she was in a dream state and did not have control of her own body. It was almost like she was a puppet and someone else was pulling the strings.
Yeah, hold on a second. Counsel? Members of the jury, I want to give you an instruction at this point. I'm going to go into this also a little bit later when I give you the full instructions at the end of the case. But you are not to consider the defendant's statements to any psychiatrist or psychologist as establishing the truth of any facts that are contained in that sentence, in those statements, all right? The defendant's statements to any psychiatrist or psychologist for purposes of evaluation cannot be considered by you as evidence of premeditation, extreme atrocity or cruelty, or specific intent to kill. Such statements are admissible only as they relate to the basis for the doctor's opinion of the defendant's mental condition. All right, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Okay? Go ahead, Mr. Riggs.
So, Doctor, to conclude, would you relate your opinion as it relates to the standard of a person being lacking criminal responsibility at the time of the commission of a crime in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Well, there are two arms to the test for criminal responsibility. One has to do the defendant's ability to control their conduct, and the other has to do with their knowledge of the wrongfulness of their acts. I'd like to address each of those separately, if I may.
Sure.
With regard to my opinion is that Ms. Clancy was, due to her mental disease, unable to conform her conduct was to the requirements of the law on the day that she took the lives of her children. And let me give you the basis of that opinion. First of all, she was hearing a voice which was commanding her to engage in the killing behavior, and she did not feel any sense of control. She felt that she had to obey the instructions she was receiving. It was a matter where she was just following the command rather than being able to make any decision to do it or not. And, for example, I asked Ms. Clancy.
No, you can't say what you talked, Doctor. You can't. You cannot say what she told you. All right.
Okay. All right. I will not do that. Let me just make sure I'm covering other aspects of this. The second evidence that she was lacking control is the fact that she made a severe suicide attempt, also based on the command hallucination that she heard that day, so that she not only cut her throat and jumped out of a window, she very much wanted to die. Now, in my research on women who kill their children, I've divided the motives into 5 categories, and I want to look at how Ms. Clancy did to those motives.
So tell us the 5 categories.
Yeah, the 5 categories are: first, altruistic filicide.
What does that mean? What does that mean, altruistic filicide?
Altruistic filicide occurs when a murder is committed out of love rather than hostility. It is an effort on a mother's part to do what is best for the child. They may believe the child is, they may have a delusional belief the child is about to be tortured in their delusional mind, and they take their life in doing what they believe is in the best interest of the children based on their delusional idea. Altruistic filicide also occurs when a mother may plan to take her own life, and in her psychotic thinking and severe depression, it is distorted, and she may believe that the child will be worse off if she remains alive. So, for example, in Ms. Clancy's case, she believed that, as the jury has already heard, she was obsessional about caring for her children. She consulted with others at work to try and do exactly what was right for her children, and she believed that if Ms. Clancy took her own life, her children would be in terrible shape, and in her mind, she believed that she would be doing her children a favor by having them go to heaven with her rather than remain on earth without her doing the mothering. Her mind was very distorted like that.
Okay. So if you could just tell us the other titles of the other 4 types that you were referred to. Just tell it without getting into detail if they don't apply to Ms. Clancy.
All right. The second category does apply to Ms. Clancy, and that is called acutely psychotic filicide.
Okay.
And this occurs when someone is frankly psychotic. They may have delusions or hallucinations. They're out of touch with reality, and rather than having any rational motive, they're simply acting on their psychotic beliefs. So those 2 both apply to Ms. Clancy. The other 3...
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, that's right. Just give us the other 3, the captions of them.
The other 3 which do not apply, one is called child maltreatment, in which a parent may shake the child to death or throw a child against a wall in an abusive manner. The next category is unwanted child, where someone, just for their convenience, the child is a burden, and they kill the child for that motive. And the final motive is spouse revenge filicide. That is, someone hates their spouse so much that they're willing to sacrifice the child as a way to punish the spouse. And the 3 latter categories clearly do not apply to Ms. Clancy. She loved her husband, respected her husband, had a good marriage. She never spanked or ever abused her child, and all of her children were wanted. In fact, she planned to have a 4th child. So those 3 categories clearly do not apply. The there, if I can explain how the two categories did apply, I've already mentioned that Ms. Clancy believed that a distorted belief that her children would just be miserable, and she could not imagine them continuing to exist and have a decent life without her being there as a mother. And so in that sense, she did what she believed was morally right, even though she understood that ordinarily killing a child is against the law. She believed that she was doing what was right for her children with her distorted, psychotic thinking about the children's need for her. And then with respect to the second category of acutely psychotic, Ms. Clancy was under the influence of a command hallucination and idea of influence, so that at that time, rather than the ability to make a rational decision, she was so in the grip of her psychotic command hallucination and idea of influence that she lacked the capacity to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law.
Okay. And, Doctor, pretty much finally, there's been some questions or allegations that Ms. Clancy did not provide information to her health care providers about her adverse effects of medication that she had been prescribed. Do you agree with that from your review of the medical records, or did she, in fact, tell her health care providers how she felt as a result of what she perceived to be the medications that were prescribed?
It's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that Ms. Clancy was actually a more sophisticated patient than most, and she was forthcoming in conveying her symptoms. The one area in which she was not fully revealing was the area of when she had an impulse to harm her children, and that was because she had a rational belief that her children may be taken away from her by a social service agency. She had an irrational belief that if she even entered a medical hospital, that her children would be taken away. So that is the one area in which she was not fully forthcoming.
Now, Doctor, in your experience, do you find that many women that are caretakers of children postpartum, after the child is born, that are having these intrusive thoughts and having these dark thoughts are, in fact, afraid of reporting them because of that very reason that you're talking about?
Sustained.
Yes, as a matter
no,
of fact.
you can't answer that.
Phrase that.
Okay. It's also been mentioned here a couple of times that she hasn't killed herself yet, even though she's in the Tewksbury Hospital. Can you tell the jurors briefly, while she's in the Tewksbury Hospital, what are the circumstances of her confinement and what type of care is being provided to her as it relates to whether or not she, or why she hasn't killed herself yet?
Well, Nancy, indeed, there is evidence of her going suicidality to such an extent that she is never allowed to be out of the presence of a staff member. Even when I conducted an examination of her and requested privacy, a staff member had to be present. So her ability to take her life in view of her process and observation is and she recognizes that, so that the reality is, no matter she does not want to live at any point, she has no choice but first to live at this time.
Thank you very much, Doctor. You have to answer some questions from the DA. Your Honor, at this point, I would like to, because I'm looking at yeah, 40-page resume, so I'd just offer that if I could.
Any objection?
No objection.
Okay, that may be marked.
Thank you.
If I may?
Yes, please. Go.
Good morning, Dr. Resnick.
Good morning.
In addition to the evaluations that you do, is it true that you've also taught some courses to other forensic psychiatrists and psychologists about how to testify in cases like these?
Yes, I have.
And you teach them how to answer questions and how to dress and how to appear believable and trustworthy, correct?
That's correct.
And in one of your trainings, excuse me, Do's and Don'ts of Depositions by Dr. Philip Resnick, in your course description, you state information beyond the question should not be volunteered because it will open up new areas for questioning, provide ammunition for attacks, eliminate the opportunity for surprise, and information fails to get to the jury, correct?
That's correct.
So you teach other psychologists how to hold back information in the discovery process to surprise the other side.
No, that's not it. And I'm not excited.
Now, a woman who kills her child can have more than one motive, correct?
Yes.
And actually, the most common motive for women who kill their children is fatal maltreatment or child abuse, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, most women who kill their kids don't do it due to mental illness, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, there's a quote from you in an article, Child Murdered by Mothers, Patterns and Prevention, where you say, quote, more filicides occur due to fatal maltreatment than because of maternal psychiatric illness, correct?
Correct.
You also have written about parents having significant emotional devastation after killing their children, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you've written in, it's a chapter 6 of Family Murder, Child Murder by Parents, in the Aftermath section, you've written, quote, these life events are likely to prolong the parent's depression. The anniversary of the children's deaths and exposure to things that remind the parent of it are likely to be upsetting, correct?
Yes.
Things like birthdays and holidays and the anniversary of the killings would all be something that would be upsetting, correct?
They sometimes are, yes.
Now, you've written a lot about malingered psychosis, correct?
Yes.
And malingering psychosis, you can have a mental illness and your malingering could be exaggerating those symptoms or saying you have psychosis symptoms when you don't, correct?
That's correct.
And one of the things that you have written, and there's an article that you wrote called Faking It, you've written in here, quote, command auditory hallucinations are easy to fabricate. Persons experiencing genuine command hallucinations do not always obey the voices, especially if doing so would be dangerous, correct?
That's correct.
You've also given some points to other practitioners. If you, quote, if you suspect a person of malingered auditory hallucination, ask what he or she does to make the voices go away or diminish in intensity, correct?
Yes.
Because typically someone who hears a voice telling them to do something horrible like kill their child will try to resist that voice initially, correct?
That there's variability. Some do and some don't.
And in fact, the case you mentioned earlier, Andrea Yates, Miss Yates, in fact, committed herself to a hospital 5 times and tried to kill herself twice, all while trying to not kill her children, correct?
Yes.
She had heard voices for months and telling her to kill her children, and to resist those voices, she actually tried to kill herself, correct?
Until she could no longer resist the voices, yes.
Right. But she tried.
Right, as did Ms. Clancy.
Well, according to the records and reports that we have that are in evidence, Ms. Clancy heard the voice and immediately acted, correct? According to those records?
Well,
Is that correct?
Well, Ms. Clancy had impulses to harm her children, which she did resist until the command hallucination when she was overwhelmed, yes.
But according to the records and the testimony that we've had, she had an impulse in December one time to harm her children, correct?
I believe it was on 2 occasions that she mentioned it to her husband.
And then never again after that until her kids were killed, correct?
There were only 2 occasions she mentioned it, but she referred to having these horrible impulses, so that suggests to me she was dealing with it on an ongoing basis, although she mentioned it only twice to her husband.
But she never said she had thoughts to kill her children. She said she had thoughts to harm her children, correct?
Yes, but actually, I think it's clear that to harm her children was to kill her children.
Well, in the records where you say that she was so clear in presenting her symptoms to her doctors, she repeatedly was asked if she had any homicidal ideation, and she repeatedly said no, correct?
That's right, and she didn't in the initial parts of her treatment, but by late December and January is when she did have those impulses.
But what
and
she
she
told
did not
her,
acknowledge them.
but what she told
She
her
did not acknowledge
doctors,
them to her doctors.
what she told her doctors in December is that she had no homicidal ideation. She only reported suicidal ideation, correct?
Yes, and as noted, that's very common because people fear their children will be taken away.
So it's better to kill them than to have them taken away.
Sustained.
No, it's not better to kill them
Hold on, Doctor.
than have them taken away.
That question is stricken, that answer is stricken. Okay.
You say that she was very forthcoming in her symptoms to her medical providers, but she never told those medical providers that she had an impulse to harm her children, correct?
That's correct.
You also, in teaching people about malingering, about faking hearing voices or being psychotic, you give pointers of what people should look for, such as patient uses no strategies to diminish hallucinations. Patient states he obeys all commands, correct?
Yes.
You also, in a podcast, evidence entitled Identifying Malingering with Dr. Philip Resnick, you were asked about malingering, and you said, and asked about hearing voices, and you said, quote, so a common example I'll use in teaching is if you hear a voice out of the blue that says, kill your mother, your moral fiber would cause you to hesitate. But if you have concurrent delusion that your mother is an evil wizard, you're more likely to act on that command hallucination, correct?
Correct.
And there's no evidence in the records or in the testimony that we've had thus far that Ms. Clancy believed that her children were evil or that they were possessed or that there was any danger posed by them or to them by such forces, correct?
Instead, Ms. Clancy
Well, it was a
had
yes or no question, Doctor.
No, go ahead. You can answer that.
Instead, Ms. Clancy had the psychotic, distorted belief that her children would be better off in heaven rather than being motherless. So that was her psychotic distortion, coupled with the command hallucination. So she met the exact requirement you're referring to.
And you believe that that was her psychotic delusion, that they would be better off without her, better off in heaven without her, because according to your report, you could figure out no rational, non-psychotic motive for her to kill her children, correct?
Yes.
And so just because you can't figure out a motive, or you don't know a motive, or the person doesn't tell you a motive, doesn't mean that there actually isn't a motive, correct?
There was a motive.
But that's not what I asked you. I did not
already.
ask you about Miss Clancy. I said, just because someone tells you that they don't have a motive, or you can't figure out a motive, doesn't mean they didn't actually have a motive, correct?
That's possible, yes.
You also state in another article identifying malingering with Dr. Philip Resnick, you point out that the rapid resolution of symptoms with medication can be a red flag, as genuine psychotic symptoms usually take longer to subside, correct?
That's correct.
Were you aware from the Tewksbury records that on page 1136 it says Ms. Clancy has been clinically stable since her admission. There have been no events of affective, cognitive, or behavioral instability since her admission, and that Ms. Clancy has not evidenced any challenges in accepting and conforming to the rules and standards. Did you review that
Yes,
note?
I'm aware of that.
Okay. Were you also
Yep.
aware on page 1168 that it says Ms. Clancy denies that she has ever experienced hallucinatory content prior to or since that event, referring to when she killed her children, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware on page 1170, it states Ms. Clancy presents with intact reality testing and no observable symptoms of psychosis. She is actively engaged in treatment. She is able to identify possible hopes for her future, including serving as an activist for postpartum psychosis awareness and participating in a wheelchair marathon. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
I move to submit these three sections as the next three exhibits.
All right. Any objection? All right. Are those part of the Tewksbury records are already in?
Yes.
Okay, those may be admitted.
Yes, please. Doctor, you mentioned that when you interviewed Ms. Clancy, you spoke to some nurses who told you she had been crying every day, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that in the Tewksbury records, in the one-to-one notes of people who watched her every minute of every day, there's no record of her crying every day?
Well, when I saw her at 4 months, I'm not sure, was she already, how long had she been at Tewksbury? Well, I'm not aware of that note, but my recollection is that she was observed crying.
But there's no record of her crying at Tewksbury every day, correct?
I have no knowledge of it.
And you mentioned that during the interview, not getting into anything that she said, but her affect, her expressions, her emotions, you said that they were flat and blunted, correct?
Yes.
Do you remember the portions of the video where she smiled and laughed?
Are you talking about the video of my interview?
What was that?
Are you talking about the videotape of my interview with her?
Yes. Yes, at the end of the video, do you recall her smiling and laughing?
So does that open up the video?
This is affect and behavior.
That's an issue we could talk about over here, and probably something best raised on cross.
Okay.
I mean, on redirect, I'm sorry.
And just getting into her affect and behavior, doctor.
Yes. Yeah, that's not inconsistent with her affect throughout the interview, especially, for example, in talking about
Well, not getting into
how
what she
delighted
talked
she
about,
was with
doctor.
it.
I'm not asking anything about what she talked about, just her expressions and her affect. Now, you mentioned that the Commonwealth experts saw Miss Clancy 3 years after you examined her, correct?
I said it was 3 years after the crime.
Okay. And you're aware that the Commonwealth was not permitted to interview Miss Clancy until after defense had filed a notice of their defense and we'd been given permission by the court to have our experts interview her, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that did not occur until approximately 2.5 years after the incident, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that postpartum psychosis doesn't typically happen 8 months after a child's born, correct?
Yes.
In fact, typically, it's within 4 weeks of a child being born, correct?
Most often, yes.
And you mentioned that her postpartum, Miss Clancy's postpartum symptoms began within that 3-month time frame of postpartum. Do symptoms have to occur within that 3-month period to be postpartum?
Well, there's a wide range of definitions of postpartum. Some scholars in the area make it the whole first year, others 3 months, others 4 weeks.
And in fact, her seeking help from a psychiatrist happened in September, which would have been 4 months after she gave birth, correct?
Correct.
You mentioned that Ms. Clancy was able to hide her symptoms of depression from her friends, that she was open with some people, but she was able to hide those symptoms from friends and other people she interacted with, correct?
Yes, hide the depth of her depression.
And so she was able to control and conform her behavior to situations in which she did not want to show people how she was feeling, correct?
Sure, very common.
Now, you wrote in your report on page 24 that Ms. Clancy had paranoid beliefs that her children would be taken away from her if anyone knew what she was going through, correct?
Yes.
But that's actually a rational belief, is it not, that if someone knows you want to harm your children, they might be taken away?
It can be rational, but it was more, it approached irrational in her case rather than rational.
I have nothing further.
Your redirect? Bless you.
No, thank you, Doctor.
All right, so if we could turn off that. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right. Reddington.
Your Honor, Lindsay Clancy rests her case.
All right. So, members of the jury, the defense has now rested its case. All right, so I'm going to talk to counsel for a minute or so over here, and we're about to go into the next phase of this case. It would be the Commonwealth is offered and given the opportunity to offer rebuttal witnesses on certain issues. And so I'm going to talk to counsel first, and I'll inquire of the Commonwealth if they wish to offer these rebuttal witnesses. Okay? So, counsel, can I see you at sidebar? All right. Attorney Sprague, does the Commonwealth wish to offer any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. If you call your next witness, please.
The Commonwealth would call Dr. Abram Mack.
Good morning. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in the truth shall be the truth, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may have a seat, sir.
All right. Good morning, Doctor.
Morning.
All right. I just ask you to keep your voice up so the jury can hear you. And with that, Attorney Buckingham, please.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please tell the jurors your first and last name?
Abram Mack.
And would you spell your name for the record, please?
Abram is spelled A, V like Victor, R like Robert, A like Apple, M like Mary.
And I'm just going to ask you to speak in a loud, clear voice. And if you need to kind of push closer to the microphone, that might help.
I will.
Thank you. What do you do for work, sir?
I'm a psychiatrist.
And how long have you been a psychiatrist?
After training, I've been a psychiatrist for 22 years now.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Sure. I went to the University of Michigan College, Cornell University for medical school. I was here at the Brigham for residency in psychiatry. And then that was followed by a fellowship in child psychiatry at Columbia University and a one-year fellowship in forensic psychiatry at New York University.
And what do you do now? What's your area of practice now?
I'm a psychiatrist. For all these 22 years, I've been serving in a lot of different roles. Currently, I'm a professor of psychiatry at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, and I see patients at a child hospital called Nemours.
And so you, in your current practice, have a clinical practice, and you also do forensic psychiatry. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you have any board certifications?
I do.
And what are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and also forensic psychiatry. I had been board certified in addiction medicine by the American Board of Addiction Medicine, but they closed. So I don't know if I can still say that I'm board certified by them.
Okay. And to what extent are you engaged in the forensic psychiatry? What areas of forensic psychiatry do you have you testified in?
I've provided testimony in perhaps almost every area of forensic psychiatry, ranging from testamentary capacity of adults who engage in contracts or appropriateness for adoption, or whether or not a person is competent or if a person is criminally responsible.
Now, in what areas of the country have you testified on those topics?
Around the country. I'm not sure how many states I've testified in, but I've been engaged in reviews or investigations of cases in, I think, more than half the states.
And what does it mean to conduct a forensic evaluation in psychiatry?
Well, it can mean a lot of different things depending on the question that's being asked by a court or other authority. Sometimes there are statutes that you as the forensic psychiatrist need to try to answer a particular question that a statute requires. Or sometimes it is a matter of giving an opinion, say in a civil case, where it's your understanding of, say, the degree of harm that the person has experienced. Sometimes great, sometimes not so great.
And you, in your experience, have testified as a forensic psychiatrist in both civil and criminal matters, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware of a difference between forensic psychiatry versus forensic psychology?
There are differences, aside from the fact that they're different professions, but they both cover mental health. There are different rules that apply to forensic psychologists in their carrying out their roles as psychologists.
Now, when you mentioned that you have done some work and testified in matters regarding criminal responsibility, right?
Correct.
And you're aware that different states have slightly different statutes when it comes to criminal responsibility.
Yes.
And so in this case, you were asked to review the matter of the Commonwealth versus Lindsay Clancy, correct?
Yes. And
so in order to do that, did you review the statutes here in Massachusetts regarding criminal responsibility?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us how it came that you were involved in this case?
I was asked by the prosecutor's office to be involved as a psychiatrist reviewing the matter.
And when you're asked or you're retained by either side in a case, a defense or a prosecution, what is the goal of the evaluation? Are you just trying to advocate for the side who hires you, or are you conducting an independent evaluation of the evidence?
Overall.
You can answer.
Well, to answer your question, certainly the goal is to provide an independent evaluation, or one would also add to provide clarity and to say what can be said. In criminal matters, sometimes it's a very certain question that it's either a yes or a no. In other matters, it's not always necessarily a strict yes or no.
Now, in criminal matters where you were asked to conduct these independent evaluations, how do you approach it? What kind of information do you seek, or would you prefer to have in order to conduct the evaluation?
Well, generally one starts with the statute and then tries to gather or review what information exists to understand the mental state of the person, if that's pertaining to the particular statutory question, and to understand the mental history and the mental state of the individual, and to see if that can be applied to the questions at hand.
And so what types of records are you generally looking at when conducting a forensic evaluation for something like criminal responsibility?
Well, one would certainly want to review psychiatric records if they exist. Ideally also to have examined the individual and to gather information, not only historical information from the individual, but to do, in that sense, an examination in real time. And that provides you the information, what we call a mental status examination.
Okay.
Other records are also important: medical records, educational records, and other records that describe the individual.
And when we're talking about a criminal case, fair to say you review the entire criminal file too, right?
Yes.
And when you're doing these evaluations and creating a database of this particular information, are there any limitations to your opinion or evaluation?
I'm not sure how you mean that.
Well, when you have these evaluations that you're conducting, namely for criminal responsibility, do those evaluations, are they limited based on the information that you have? Meaning, if you don't have everything at the time you do your evaluation, is there kind of a caveat to your opinion?
Well, when I write an opinion or state an opinion, it is based on the totality of the information that I have. If additional information comes along, I am open to receiving that and integrating that into my understanding of the totality.
Now, when you interview the individual in these evaluations, the purpose of the interview or purpose of your contact with them is not to provide treatment, correct?
Correct.
And the opinion that you reach ultimately is based on the defendant's mental state, correct?
To the extent that impacts the question, yes.
Okay. Well, when we're talking about criminal responsibility, you'd agree that's kind of the central issue, is the person's mental state at the time of the alleged offense, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So in Massachusetts here, with the question of criminal responsibility, are you aware of what the standard is?
Yes.
And what is it?
Well, it uses particular language based on the common concept throughout the country called the McNaughton standard. And I could read to you the specifics of the language, but effectively it refers to two pieces. Well, actually starts with three. One is, did the person have a mental disorder at the time of the event? And then secondly, the two prongs speak to specifics about the mental state at the time. One being, and I would want to refer to the actual statute.
Well, if we can, maybe we break that down for the jury.
Yeah.
So the first part of this for criminal responsibility is the question of, does the person suffer from a mental disease or defect, correct?
Correct.
Objection to the leading. Let's see if he knows.
Yeah, if you just ask him.
I can rephrase
He's
that.
aware, and if you want to refresh his memory, you can.
Well, you've already testified the first part of the analysis, and I think you used the terminology mental disorder.
Yes,
right?
I did.
And you're aware that a mental disorder is a clinical term.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I apologize. What was that?
A mental disorder is a clinical term. The terminology mental disease or defect, are you aware that's a legal term?
Okay.
Okay. Well, so when you are conducting evaluations for criminal responsibility.
Is that an answer?
Yes.
Said,
I'm
okay.
sorry. Yes.
Yeah, all right.
When you're conducting an evaluation for criminal responsibility and you're trying to determine whether a person suffers from a mental disease or defect, do you look to mental disorders to see if that meets criteria?
I would evaluate if the person has ever had a psychiatric or a mental disorder.
And what kinds of tools do you have available to you to do that?
Well, there are two tools. One is gathering of historical information, and the other is the information you gather from actually seeing the person face to face.
And as a psychiatrist, that's something you do in your clinical practice all the time, right?
Correct.
Because one of the main things you're going to do is look to try to diagnose an individual.
Correct.
And so how do you go about determining that if a person has a mental disorder?
In psychiatry, we make diagnoses in a descriptive manner. We look to see ways in which the individual has symptoms or signs of mental disorders or mental defects or psychiatric disorders. So in particular, one will start with trying to gather as much information as possible about what are the things that bother the individual. That may be their mood, that might be things that they get anxious about, that may be abnormal movements that they make. And that will also be aligned with understanding their medical condition, any medications that they take, any substances that they use. There's an array of information, sets of information that one gathers in that portion where you ask questions. But effectively, you're asking questions about symptoms. And one is trying to understand not just symptoms, but the degree of impairment that symptoms might be causing an individual.
Okay. And do you work with any sort of tools that help you identify particular characteristics of symptoms associated with disorders in your field?
Well, at times, individuals use scales or tests. which can be psychological tests or scales that ask particular questions. Or other times you might use tests that are biological tests, like the person's brain waves, called an EEG, or laboratory tests.
When you're talking about diagnosing an individual for any particular mental disorder, are there specific criteria for different types of disorders?
Yes, there are.
And is there a source that you use as a psychiatrist in order to identify the criteria for different disorders?
We use a text called the DSM, otherwise known as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's currently in its 5th edition, or actually a revision was made of its 5th edition. And so that text, which is created and vetted by a large number of professionals, provides criteria for the different disorders, and these are known as operational criteria. In psychiatry, there aren't necessarily gold standards that you can use for diagnosis, like finding a bacterium or finding an anatomical tissue. So for the last 60 years, 70 years, psychiatry has turned to agreed upon definitions that are listed in the DSM.
Okay. And you said it's not the end-all be-all, right, of diagnosing. You use your training and experience as well, but it's a tool that you use.
Well, they are the criteria that one uses to make the diagnosis. It is not a guidebook for how to gather that information. It's not a how-to, but it is the standard.
Okay. So now going back to the legal standard here in Massachusetts, so one part is the disorder, right? And you said there's a second part.
Right. So the second part are particular criteria about the person's state at the time of the event. So one of them is they both utilize the verb to have retained, retained substantial capacity to know the act was wrong or against the law, and the other being retain substantial capacity to control or conform one's behaviors to the law.
And so when you're talking about criminal responsibility here in Massachusetts, is it fair to say you're looking at the person's conduct and their condition at the time of the offense?
That's right.
And the information that you're gathering in this overall evaluation, getting history and kind of looking at the person as a whole, is that helpful to understand the person's diagnosis when you're being asked this particular question?
Yes.
But ultimately, you're rendering an opinion of the person at the time of the offense.
That's correct.
So in this particular case, you were provided a series of records and information regarding the defendant, Lindsay Clancy, correct?
Yes.
And can you just give us a general overview of the sources of information you had available to you?
Generally speaking, there was the criminal file, as you mentioned before. And then in terms of medical or psychiatric records, there was the records from the hospital that she's at right now, the hospital that she was at right before, called Spalding, the hospital that she was at before that, which was Brigham and Women's. In addition, there was the medical records from outpatient treaters, and there was also the records from her admission to McLean Hospital. So overall, there were outpatient records, there were inpatient records. For the most part, those all correlated with her own care. Additionally, we received the pediatric records for some of the victims in this matter. And as I mentioned before, the criminal file.
Okay. And in addition to the records related to the defendant herself, we also provided some other reports to review.
I was. By
other psychiatrists and psychologists?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that one of the things that's useful in these evaluations is an interview with the person themselves, right?
Yes.
And did you engage in an interview with the defendant?
I did.
And when did that occur?
I interviewed her on April 10th and April 12th of this year.
And that's of this year in 2026?
Correct.
And what were your observations of her when you first met with her on April 10th? Can you describe her demeanor?
Generally, she was friendly and cooperative.
When you begin an interview with an individual that you're evaluating, do you conduct what's referred to as a mental status exam?
Well, the mental status exam happens all the while that you're interacting with somebody. You're always observing for aspects of their emotions, how they speak, their mood, and so forth. Sometimes there are directed aspects of the mental status examination where you are asking about particular cognitive capacities like executive functioning and attention and concentration. But the gathering of information about the person's mood, for example, or their thought process, that happens throughout the entire portion.
Okay, and so over the course of the time that you met with the defendant, were you able to make observations of, for instance, whether she maintained eye contact with you when speaking?
Right, so she did maintain eye contact.
Okay, what about her emotional state?
So overall, if we go through the various components, like what's called her affect, which is her emotional expression or her mood, generally speaking, there were not many abnormalities in her presentation, and I can go through them. They include the way in which she speaks, that is to say the rapidity of speech, if the speech is made in sort of regular intervals between words. In terms of thought, does the person, and in this case did Ms. Clancy, make goal-directed ideas? Mm-hmm. Was there a particular content of the ideas? So generally speaking, for all the components of the mental status examination, there were not really abnormalities. I would say at some points she seemed distressed by some topics. I believe tearful at one point, but otherwise nothing remarkable on mental status examination.
Okay. And in these evaluations, when you're interviewing the individuals, are you also kind of taking account of their physical presentation?
Yes.
And obviously, when you met with her in April of 2026, you were able to observe her physical condition, right?
Yes.
And what were your observations of her physical condition?
Well, she's utilizing a wheelchair. Generally speaking, there were not necessarily abnormal movements that I observed. She seemed comfortable physically.
Did you find that she was able to kind of navigate her situation herself? Meaning you were in a room with her with other individuals, right?
Yes.
And she was able to kind of take care of her own.
I'm going to object leading at this point, just as they object.
Sustain, if you just ask the observations.
What did you observe her do as far as moving herself around the room? Was she able to do that?
Yes, at the moments when there were transitions, when we took a break and she went out to the hall, she was able to navigate her wheelchair one place or another.
And when you spoke with her on April 10th and April 12th, were you able to kind of have a conversation with her about her level of functioning at the Tewksbury?
Yes.
And did she tell you anything about what her general day looked like?
She described her general day. She described basically her existence there at Tewksbury.
Okay. And did she indicate to you whether she engaged with other patients, or did she spend her day mostly in bed, or what did she say about that?
Mostly she described she stays in bed or on her own. I don't think she described interacting with patients very much. There were a couple of ways in which she did interact with staff, at least. There was a therapist that she described working with. She did describe having had a physical therapist at a certain point. I'm not sure if I remember if she still was getting physical therapy. She stated she wasn't very interested in the physical therapy that she was getting there. She wasn't interested in the food there. She described having visitors at a not infrequent basis, and that sometimes she was able to eat food or drinks that were brought in by them.
And who were her visitors, if you recall?
Family members mostly, as well as, I believe, both, and I'm not sure if they were specifically from the Brigham or Mass General, but or any place in particular, but I believe religious figures, chaplain or priest from some organizations.
And her having told you that she kind of has visitors, were you able to corroborate that in reviewing records that she had visitors?
Yes.
And were you able to corroborate or were you able to identify in the records that she did interact with staff and patients at the hospital, according to the records?
To some degree, yes.
And you said that she had indicated to you that the food wasn't appealing at the hospital. And did you have the chance to observe her consuming her own snacks or beverages?
Beverages, yes.
Now, did she indicate to you her level of attention to hygiene and grooming while at Tewksbury?
She did. She described that she wasn't very interested in her own hygiene or grooming.
And were you able to later in the conversation speak with her about her ability to take care of her own daily activities like grooming? For instance, showering. Was she able to do that on her own?
Showering is embarrassing. It requires staff to help her, and that's one way in which she would rather not. It may also be that she described a lack of interest, so it's both components.
When you observed her, did she appear to be disheveled or not properly groomed in your meetings on April 10th and 12th?
No, she appeared groomed sufficiently, and I believe her hair was combed and she was wearing neat clothing.
Now, did she describe to you her thoughts or feelings about her current situation?
Yes.
And what did she say about that?
Well, she described feeling depressed, which she termed situational depression. She described feeling, I'm not sure the exact term she used, but feeling miserable, not wanting to be alive.
And
Finish, please. If he's finished, that's fine, but don't cut him off.
No, yeah, that's right.
I'm sorry, doctor, were you done?
Yes.
Thank you. So when you were meeting with her, do you recall her indicating that she reported being devastated,
Yes.
that she was devastated and grieving by her current situation?
Yes.
When you met with her at the Tewksbury Hospital, did you go over with her what her current treatment regimen is, what current medication she was on?
I did.
Was she able to tell you what medication she was taking?
Yes.
And were you able to confirm that with the records, that that was an accurate report?
Yes.
So what medications, when you met with her in April 2026, was she currently on?
Well, in terms of psychiatric medications, the main medication of note is olanzapine. I believe that there were several medications being used for her physical needs. One that helps with her bladder, one that helps with movement of the GI system.
Well, let's just kind of focus on the psychiatric medications, right? Because that's of your interest here. You mentioned olanzapine. What's the common or the brand name for that?
It's called Zyprexa.
And what is it used to treat?
Originally, it was created to be an antipsychotic medication, so to treat psychosis.
Okay. And are you aware that it's prescribed to Ms. Clancy for bipolar?
Yes, it is also used for mania. It is also sometimes used.
The question was bipolar.
Yeah, the question, if you could just listen to the question, answer the question, and then if the Commonwealth or the other side wants to add to the answer, they'll ask you, okay? Go ahead.
So I think my question was, are you aware that the Zyprexa is prescribed for bipolar?
So bipolar is a disorder. Yes, bipolar is a disorder of mania, which is, I'm sorry, why I was mentioning at that point.
And what was the dosage of Zyprexa that she was on, if you recall?
I believe it was 2.5 milligrams.
And in your experience, is that a significant dosage?
No, it's a small dose.
Are you aware of any other psychiatric medications that she's prescribed at Tewksbury?
I believe she's also taking trazodone.
Okay. How about Wellbutrin? Is that ring a bell?
Yes, Wellbutrin is an antidepressant medication.
Okay. And clonidine, does that sound familiar?
Yes, clonidine is a medication that's sometimes used for anxiety or to help people go to sleep.
And are you familiar with the propranolol?
Propranolol is also a medication. It also is sometimes used to help with anxiety.
Okay. And as far as the dosage of medication that she's on, based on your review of the records, are those high doses, low doses?
Overall, they're on the lower side of dosages.
And you indicated briefly in your testimony that she had reported to you that she believes to have situational depression.
Yes.
Did you have a conversation with her about the diagnosis from Tewksbury?
There were times that if you're asking about bipolar disorder, at one point she made the statement that she wasn't convinced that she has bipolar or has had bipolar disorder. She described situational depression in terms of feeling depressed about the several stressors that she experiences today.
And what are those stressors?
Well, the remorse and sadness about the events that this case is about, her separation or estrangement from her then husband, her being separated from the world, her physical injury.
Do you recall her actually using the term remorse, or is that just your description of the conversation you had?
That's my summarization right here.
Okay. Now, when you were meeting with her, did you talk to her about past medication regimens that she had been on prior to the current regimen of the Zyprexa and Wellbutrin?
Yes.
And so are you aware that she had previously been prescribed at some point lithium?
Yes.
And is that something that would be important to you to know when you were conducting your own evaluation for diagnosis of whether somebody was on lithium?
It might help, but in psychiatry we don't make diagnoses based on medication response.
And when it came to the report of the lithium, fair to say it was not something that was trialed for a very long period of time.
Yes, and let me correct that. It's not that we don't make diagnoses. We don't categorize or define disorders by medication response. I heard the description of the trial of lithium. That was a short trial.
Okay. And about her physical injuries, did you have a conversation with her about her understanding of her physical injuries?
Yes.
Do you recall whether she reported that she had any head injuries after January 24th?
She denied that she had had a head injury.
And was she familiar with the extent of her spinal injury?
Yes.
Meaning she was able to explain to you where the injuries occurred? And
that's correct.
Were you able to review in your interview with her past psychiatric history?
Yes.
And did she have a significant past psychiatric history?
Prior to the year 2022, she had not. She had been, over time, very hard driving, someone who tended to get anxious, and anxiety sometimes pushed her to achieve or to do things. There had been two short periods of depression or anxiety throughout her lifetime. In one, she had been prescribed antidepressant medication around 2 years before 2022, which she had not actually taken. She had tended to resolve her anxiety or depression through exercise and hard work.
And when you say the two short periods, are you speaking of periods after childbirth?
One was while she was in nursing school, and the other was after the birth of her second child.
So you were able to have the conversation with her about nursing school and going on medications during that experience, right?
Yes.
And as far as the second episode where she described anxiousness and seeking medication, did she indicate to you whether she actually took medication?
No,
after the birth?
Sorry.
After the birth of her second child?
She had been prescribed it, but she hadn't taken it.
Now, based on your review of records and your interview with her, were you able to identify and learn some general information about her family history?
Yes.
Did she report anyone in her family suffering from any other mental illness in the past?
No.
So no history of bipolar disorder or prior depression?
Correct. No such history.
Did you also review with her her work history?
Yes.
And did you talk to her about whether there were any adverse events in her past that affected her?
That is something I asked about. And also I was able to look at her records to try to elicit if there were any particular adverse events in her life.
Did you find any?
No.
Evidence of any? And you said that prior to 2022, there hadn't been, or there was minimal psychiatric history. Did you look at and talk to her about the period of 2022 from approximately September leading up to the events of January 24th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
So as far as going through that time period, you were able to review her medication history during that time?
Yes.
And fair to say there was a significant amount of medications that you looked at as far as what she was taking and what it was prescribed for?
Correct.
Did anything stand out to you in the timeline of her medication history that was significant in this case?
Well, she was initially prescribed medication in September of 2022. She didn't actually start taking that medication, sertraline, until October. There were several different medications that were prescribed. It is not clear that she actually took every medication that was ever prescribed or that she necessarily took it more than one or two times. There was a period of trial on a second antidepressant called Prozac. There were various medications used to help her to sleep. And then there was a several-week period of taking a medication called Seroquel or quetiapine.
Are you familiar with that medication in your practice?
I am.
And is it fair to say that that medication has multiple functions, like most psychiatric medications? When you reviewed her history, what was the initial dose that she was prescribed for it?
Just 25 milligrams.
And what is a 25 milligram dose of Seroquel? What is that generally prescribed for?
Well, it's often prescribed these days to help individuals to sleep. But Seroquel is also, like Zyprexa, a antipsychotic medication. It can be used to help people to sleep. It can be used to help psychosis. It can be used to help the treatment of depression.
Okay. And as far as your review of the medication timeline for this defendant with the Seroquel, would the amount of time that she took the Seroquel have had any lasting effects biologically on her brain or her body?
There's no known effect that one would have from the amount of time that she took it. There could have been temporary effects, which could have been affecting her functioning or her psychological reaction to her functioning. But there's no known biological long-term effect.
So when you say that they could have some effect, are we talking about symptoms or negative symptoms maybe?
So Seroquel might affect a person's ability to think straight. We talked earlier about cognition, the ability to pay attention, to concentrate, to have memory. And Seroquel can negatively affect your cognitive functioning, although it is expected that that will eventually go away when you stop taking the medication.
And is Seroquel a type of medication that lingers in a person's system?
Not substantially. There are some medications that do linger, like diazepam or Valium, which is another medication that she was later prescribed. All medications are, on a relative basis. So diazepam will stay in your body much longer than, say, lorazepam, a different benzodiazepine.
Okay, but as far as the Seroquel goes, once a person stops taking it, is it fair to say that the symptoms or any negative symptoms that they have would eventually resolve themselves?
Yes.
And you're aware of the medications, the last reported medications that the defendant was on right before the events of January 24th?
I am.
And what were those?
Melatonin, lorazepam, trazodone, and an antidepressant medication called amitriptyline.
And as far as the amitriptyline, you're aware of what the dosage was?
Well, on the day before January 24th, it became 20 milligrams, but for several days before that, it was 10 milligrams.
Now, in your experience, a 10 milligram to 20 milligram dose of amitriptyline, is that a significant dosage?
It's small. The usual starting dose for an adult is 150 milligrams.
Are you aware of what the chief complaints or problems that the defendant had been reporting at the time when these medications were all being prescribed to her in 2022?
Well, it's a several-month period, but it started in September of 2022 with complaints of anxiety and depression.
And fair to say, in reviewing all the records and with your conversation, that sleep also was a main issue or a complaint.
Yes, that's right.
And in some of the medications that you reviewed, is sleep, could the medications themselves affect a person's sleep?
Yes, sertraline can.
Now, as far as past diagnosis of this defendant, you were able to review overall in all the records that were available to you what different providers had given as far as past diagnoses, correct?
Yes.
And as far as your overall evaluation in determining criminal responsibility, where you have to answer first that question of mental disease or defect, do you rely on those prior diagnoses or do you come to your own conclusions?
I come to my own conclusions.
Are the fact that there were past diagnoses something that you consider?
Yes, especially to the extent that they highlighted the basis for those prior diagnoses. I don't necessarily have to agree with the diagnoses, but I'm interested in what was observed in terms of coming to those diagnoses.
And when you're doing these types of evaluations for criminal responsibility, why do you not rely on a past diagnosis? Why do you come to your own conclusion?
Well, that's part of being an independent evaluator, where in your mind you're able to collate the information and make your own diagnosis.
As far as kind of before we move on to your actual diagnosis, in addition to the interview that you had with the defendant over those 2 days, reviewing all the records, did you attempt to speak with what are called collaterals?
I did not.
Is that something that you sometimes do in these evaluations?
Sometimes.
Fair to say in this particular case, you did have a significant amount of information from people that were close to the defendant, right?
That was my view, yes.
And after speaking with the defendant, did she identify to you some people that maybe you could talk to?
I don't remember who she said, but I think she suggested perhaps her husband or then husband.
But you yourself didn't have an interview with Patrick Clancy, did you?
No.
But you were able to review his grand jury testimony and interviews he's given with the police in the past, right?
Yes, I did. And CPS.
And as far as speaking with the defendant's parents or her sister, are you aware that attempts were made or requests were made to speak with them, but they didn't respond?
I wasn't aware of that. I was not.
So based on everything that you reviewed in this case, were you able to come to a conclusion about diagnosis?
Yes, I did.
And at the time that you conducted this evaluation, what is your opinion about diagnosis?
My opinion about her diagnosis in the span from 2022 to 2023 is that she suffered from what's called a major depressive episode. That probably is a part of what's called a major depressive disorder, but the important point about it is the major depressive episode.
What made you come to that conclusion based on her presentations?
The information about her feelings and the progression of her illness highlighted that it was best represented by a major depressive episode. It's a condition defined in DSM-5 where an individual displays problems with mood, problems with feeling pleasure, feelings of guilt or worthlessness, problems with appetite, problems with sleep, preoccupation with death or suicide, poor concentration, poor energy, perhaps also what's called psychomotor agitation or retardation. So one doesn't necessarily need to show all of those, but as it is in the DSM criteria sets, one needs to have a certain threshold, and her history and her description of her experience, in my view, matched a major depressive episode.
Okay. And you indicated that it was kind of a progressive thing from the fall into January of 2023, right?
Yes.
And in addition to the low mood, were you able to identify that she presented with anxiety at various points?
Yes, very much.
And did you also make observations of obsessive thinking?
Yes, obsessive thinking is a kind of anxiety where you repeatedly think about a topic, maybe that you're asking, what if? And it's the kind of form of anxiety that you frequently see in an anxiety disorder called generalized anxiety disorder. I think it's possible she also had generalized anxiety disorder, but that is sort of secondary to the major depressive episode.
Okay. Now, in the time closest to January 24th of 2023, did you take a look at what her presentation or what her mental state was then, based on all the information that you had available to you?
Yes, I did.
Did you identify whether she was ever presenting in a manic state or a hypomanic state?
Throughout the period from 2022 to 2023, no. There was never indication of any element of mania or hypomania.
So just to make it kind of clear to the jury here, when you talk about major depressive disorder, that's a identified disorder in the DSM, right?
Yes.
And when we use terminology like mania, right, what is mania?
So mania is a mood state, just like major depressive episode is a mood state. And these are the sort of building blocks of the mood disorders, bipolar disorders and major depressive disorder. So just like major depressive episode, mania is defined in the DSM, where with a certain time threshold, in this case for mania 7 days, where you consistently have at least 4 of the following symptoms, you would be called being in a manic state. So that includes distractibility, a type of thinking called flight of ideas, grandiosity, excessive goal-directed behavior, pressured speech or some abnormality of speech, a reduced degree of need for sleep, and also the 7th would be an engagement in activities that have a high potential that are pleasurable but have a high potential for painful consequences. So mania requires 7 days of that, most of the day, every day, and you need 4 over 7 days. Hypomania is a lesser type of mania, and you need only 3 over a 4-day period. In both cases, as it is for major depressive episode, you also need to demonstrate that the person is impaired in a clinically significant way. That is to say, they have clinically significant impairment or distress. So these are the building blocks for the mood conditions that we're talking about.
And so when you say you looked at the defendant's condition from September through January, September 2022 through January 2023, did you observe or did you find any evidence of mania or hypomania in what was reported was her conduct or her presentation?
I could not find any example of behavior or thinking that corresponded with those elements of mania or hypomania.
Now, what about in the days immediately after the incident, were there, you said you reviewed records from Brigham and Women's Hospital, correct?
Correct.
Did you identify or could you find any evidence of mania or hypomania during that time period?
No.
And in fact, there are actually some instances that would tell you that she was in those states, correct? Like her behavior?
Yes, sustained.
During the time period of immediately after the incident, what did you observe or did you observe in the records some activity at Brigham and Women's Hospital that would show that she had linear thinking and goal direction?
Well, after she was removed from the medication called dexmedetomidine, which was sedating her and having her sleep intentionally. After that point, she awakened, the records indicate, and was able to think coherently with goal-directed thoughts. One example, and so the various mental status examinations done by the doctors at the Brigham generally showed normal mental status. One particular portion of the record reviews their review of whether or not she had the ability to make a decision. In that case, a change to her healthcare proxy. And so the physicians there were able to examine her closely in order to understand that she did have decision-making capacity.
And that's an example of something you reviewed in the record that was close in time to the incident itself, correct?
Yes.
And you also were able to review records from Jennifer Tufts from an appointment with the defendant the day before the incident occurred, correct?
I did.
And again, in those records, did you find anything that would have been suggestive of mania or hypomania?
Not of mania or hypomania, no.
What about psychosis? Did you observe any of that?
I did not throughout the period in question.
So tell us what psychosis means.
Psychosis is a form of thinking where the person has disorganization and also may have a lack of what is called reality testing. So the individual may not be able to engage in behaviors or activities or cognitive thoughts to check if a belief or an experience is real or not.
So is there any particular way in which a person can display psychosis?
Psychosis can be displayed in many different ways. It can be based on the things a person says. For example, delusions are fixed, false beliefs that the individual has, and that they exist despite the person being told that that's not true or testing it with others. You also can at least suspect psychosis in the form of hallucinations, which are unreal stimuli that an individual experiences. Sometimes you may see individuals actually moving their body to respond to stimuli that they think or they are experiencing in the environment. But hallucinations can also be taste, smell, or things that you hear or things that you see or feel on your body. And there is a kind of psychosis that includes some of that, but also simply includes an individual's lack of ability to act in an organized manner.
So a person in psychosis can sometimes do the normal things that they always do, right?
It depends on what kind of psychosis and how bad the psychosis is or to what extent it is occurring. But individuals with, say, delusional disorder, which is a disorder where your problem is you have a delusion that is affecting your life, those individuals can mostly go about their lives in other areas, at least other areas that don't have to do with that particular false belief.
What about with hallucinations? How does that manifest itself?
There is a subgroup of the population that actually experiences hallucinations frequently and has no negative effect from it. But for those who have hallucinations as a part of a disorder of psychosis or bipolar or mood, there are ways in which the individual can live with the psychosis or live with the hallucination and be able to be resilient to it and go ahead with their lives. So
even if a person does have some form of psychosis or has delusions or hallucinations, they could still manage in society by following the rules, right?
Like I said, it depends on which delusion or which hallucination, but there are individuals, and it may be who can, and there may also be people who can on a stable basis, but there also are individuals.
Next question.
As far as a person who might be suffering from psychosis, can they appreciate or do they know right from wrong?
There's no reason that psychosis in of itself inhibits a person's ability to know right from wrong.
Now, as far as in this case with this particular defendant, you have identified that you believe it's a major depressive disorder, right?
Yes.
Did you consider other diagnoses?
Yes.
What about bipolar? Did you consider bipolar?
I weighed whether there might have been bipolar disorder.
And so why not for this defendant?
Well, to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you need to have had a manic episode. That's at least for bipolar type 1. For bipolar type 2, you need to have had a hypomanic episode. And there's no information in the available record that displays either of those. So you can't diagnose bipolar disorder.
Did you consider the fact that this defendant, or that there's been some indication of postpartum for the defendant?
Yes.
And did that affect your opinions about diagnosis?
As I said before, in psychiatry, we diagnose based on the symptoms that the individual presents with. So in the DSM, in our manner of diagnosing, when you have discerned what is the prominent symptom that the individual is suffering from, that becomes the disorder that carries your diagnosis. There are times that you can designate that it has occurred in the postpartum period. DSM states that would be within 4 weeks of birth. It also allows for the symptoms to have occurred before birth. So that is the standard that we utilize when we choose to add on that designation of something being postpartum.
Could I object? It doesn't matter what we do, it's what he does.
All right, next question.
So as far as consideration of postpartum, do you rely on the DSM-5 in your diagnostic criteria?
I do.
You're aware that there are other, that it's not universal across the world and that there are other opinions about the postpartum period, right?
I'm aware that there are psychiatrists and others who have asked to make a specific diagnosis that relates to psychiatric problems in the postpartum state. That has been studied over the years. At this point, that has been suggested to the makers of the DSM and has been rejected.
But so I guess my question is more based on your overall view of or review of this particular defendant. The onset of symptoms, when did they occur in this postpartum period, or did they?
The distress that we're talking about began in September, which is about 4 months after the birth of the most recent child.
And so if you're relying on the DSM as 4 weeks postpartum for a lot of these illnesses, mental illnesses, then the defendant was well outside that period, right?
Correct.
And as far as for the last child, when the killings occurred, that would have been 8 months after the postpartum period, correct?
Roughly, yes.
Now, in this case, you are aware of certain behaviors and thoughts that the defendant had that have been suggested as psychotic, correct?
Yes.
And did you consider those as potential psychotic features for this defendant?
Yes.
And so can you explain to us some of those potential features and what your opinion is about them?
Right. Well, some of them were beliefs or concerns that Ms. Clancy had, which weren't necessarily psychotic. So one was the idea that in the midst of her distress and her impairment, that Child Protective Services or the Child Welfare Agency would act on somehow take away her kids, to speak in a global way, but to somehow interact with her. I don't know that that's psychotic. Another is the idea that she was damaged permanently by the medications that she took. I can appreciate that she felt side effects and a degree of change from the medications that she took. So I don't know that that feeling or that belief is necessarily psychotic. So those are two that I would mention right off the bat.
What about the idea that somebody could hear her thoughts? Did you look into that?
There was one episode where she wasn't sure and asked her mother, I believe, the question, "Can you hear my thoughts?" And was told no. And so while there is a form of psychosis called thought broadcasting, that wasn't her belief. That wasn't her belief that she was engaging in thought broadcasting where she was putting her thoughts out into the world. As I read it, the question was not psychotic. The question was one that reflected the distress and the intrusive thoughts that she was having without it necessarily being psychotic. She engaged in reality testing when she asked, "Did you hear that?"
And you had the conversation with her about thought broadcasting in your interview, correct?
Yes.
And you were able to ask some follow-up questions of her directly to identify whether she was or wasn't doing that.
Yes.
And based on your conversation with her and what you learned in that interview, did you believe that she was engaged in thought broadcasting?
No, I do not.
You're aware that there were also concerns that were voiced by her that there was other things wrong with her body, not just damage from medication, right?
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you consider that to determine whether that was a psychotic feature for this defendant?
Yes. So an example was her worry that she had ketoacidosis. I didn't necessarily think that that was psychotic. It may have been wrong, but it wasn't necessarily psychotic. She had been given a medication, Seroquel, where one of the side effects is that it negatively interferes with your glucose system. And ketoacidosis is the worst case scenario when you have poor control of your glucose. So I don't know that she had a fixed false belief that she had ketoacidosis, but she was worried about having ketoacidosis.
So when you say that you considered these things and you didn't believe them to be psychotic, are you talking about them in the realm of, were they delusional, were they fixed false beliefs, or something else?
Right. So I use that term specifically, as I said before, a delusion, which is a form of psychosis, is a fixed false belief, which is really immutable. You can't be convinced otherwise. But these were not fixed false beliefs. These were concerns.
And did you find that the concerns were rational based on your overall view of everything?
Right. Not only were they concerns, but they aligned with the realities that she had experienced.
Now, what about the idea of these intrusive thoughts? You reviewed the records to know that was a common report of her, that she had intrusive thoughts, correct?
Yes.
And that at various points she did identify that she did want to die.
Yes.
Is being suicidal a form of psychosis?
No.
What, if anything, does the idea of suicide tell you about this defendant or about her situation?
Well, it tells me that she was suffering, and that it was a part of, in my view, it was a part of a major depressive episode. 10 to 15% of women in the postpartum period have depressive disorders, and it can be very serious, and it can lead to suicidality or the need for hospitalization or other interventions. So the records show in my interviews that I gathered information that she was suffering, and suicidality is a form of suffering.
Now, when you're talking about suicidality, does it have to make sense why the person is suicidal?
No, suicidality occurs, but it doesn't always make sense. Sometimes there might be places where one might say, well, why was that person suicidal? They had only good things in life, speaking hypothetically. But especially when an individual has depression, it just occurs.
Now, when you're talking about people that have suicidal ideation, are there certain things known as protective factors?
Yes.
And did you identify in your review of this case in the records whether the defendant presented with any protective factors when it comes to suicidality?
Well, are you asking, did Ms. Clancy identify protective factors?
Yeah, at some point, is it fair to say she did identify protective factors?
She did.
And what were the protective factors?
Mainly her mother and her children. That is to say, she wanted to, her urges or her interest in suiciding was something that she chose not to do because of the worry that she would hurt them by suiciding.
And your review of the records from McLean Hospital, fair to say that one of the reasons for discharge was that she herself identified that she wouldn't have commit the act because of her kids.
That was one of the factors. When I make decisions to allow somebody to be discharged, it's an overall weighing of risk factors and protective factors.
All right, Counsel, it's 1 o'clock. Why don't we take the afternoon recess at this point, okay? All right, thank you, Doc. So, members of the jury, we're going to take the afternoon recess. As I always tell you, no research, writing, talking about this matter, and we'll have you back here approximately 2 o'clock, okay?
All rise, please, jurors. Next.
All right. Counsel, any need to discuss anything before the break?
No, thank you.
No.
All right, so we'll be in recess till approximately 2 o'clock.